statement, I want to let you know that our holiday party will be December 11th. That's Saturday, December 11th.
It's a Saturday, right?
At Info Age. That's that away. Info Age, that away. Christmas party, December 11th at Info Age, and in the dining hall.
And this year, everyone will be paying. We talked about that.
Yes, we will be paying.
Yes.
Right. It's we've had it for the last 2 years. We've been paying. Yeah. Yeah. All right. The letters will go out, Marvin.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest speaker this evening, our very own John Dilks. If you don't know John Dilks, I don't understand why you don't know John Dilks. But John writes a column, the old radio column for QST magazine, and he's been doing it for 11 years now. And I'm sure he's been doing a lot more before that. I've known John early on when he used to travel around with his communications van, which I think is on milk crates now, or
Almost.
almost, yeah. But it was really neat to see. You know, he had a compilation of boat anchors in there from the beginning to the end. That was really neat. Unfortunately, it doesn't get around anymore, but I certainly enjoyed it when I did see it. Where is it? I mean, it's in your driveway, or where?
It's right next to the house.
Right next to the house. Okay.
It needs new tires.
Oh, yeah. 6 tires.
Big ones.
Okay, all right. All right, listen, John this evening is presenting his talk on radio and airships. Radio and airships. And not tires, radio and airships, okay? So without further ado, they're attached. Okay, hey, this would go on your suspender, or you could stick it in your suspender.
Yeah, that's good.
All right.
What are you doing there?
Okay.
Okay, please.
Okay. Hello, everybody. On my title page I put together here, I wanted to put Tony Flanagan's picture on there. We need to remember him more often than we do. If it wasn't for Tony, we all wouldn't be here tonight. He got this club started. He had some good help, and he gave us some good leadership in the beginning, and set some important goals for us. And getting a museum was one of the goals that he always wanted, and it's just a shame that he isn't here to enjoy it today. I'm going to talk about the Airship America, which sailed from Atlantic City with the idea of crossing the Atlantic. And the reason probably most of you didn't hear about it is they were not successful. They did not cross. And history tends to favor those that are successful or somewhat successful. But what they did really did make some important findings in science and in radio, and they accomplished many things for the first time. And we'll talk about some of those as we go along. Now, Jack Irwin was the radio operator at Sysconic, I think it is, that when the, the ship that sunk in 1908, Republic. Thank you very much. Senior moment. When the Republic and the Florida collided, he was the land-based operator that received the CQD, and he was very responsible operator, and he helped in that rescue. After that, he went to sea, and when he returned from sea, he got an opportunity. He was assigned to go to Atlantic City and meet a gentleman down there and be the first operator on an airship that was going to cross the Atlantic. So, and he said in his writings that he wasn't sure whether that was really going to be good or not so good. He wasn't 100% sure as what he wanted to do, but he was a good operator. He followed directions. There were about, I think he said 6 or 8 ship-going operators in the company at the time, and he didn't have a big choice about where he was going to be assigned. So he went to Atlantic City. So He later was employed with Radio Broadcasting Magazine, and in 1926 they asked him to write this story down, which he had not really written for any magazines outside of the Marconi family. So this is the first time that he wrote this story and made it public, and of course he had some good photographs with it. This is one of them. And this is the title page to the article in Radio Broadcast Magazine. Atlantic City in 1910 was an ocean resort. You can see people swimming there. There are a lot of hotels, and it was a popular place. And the reason for it was before air conditioning. So if you wanted to be cool in the summer, you went to the beach. And Atlantic City was a short train ride from Philadelphia, and there were connections from New York, so there was a lot of people that went there. And in 1910, in addition, there was an air show in Atlantic City. And everybody who was anybody in flight, including the Wright brothers, was in Atlantic City that summer. So it kind of was almost a happy coincidence that they decided to launch the Airship America from Atlantic City. Prior to this, they had attempted to, this was not with Jack Irwin, they attempted to discover the North Pole with this airship, and they had made a couple of attempts and were unsuccessful. Then the North Pole was discovered by Peary, and so they decided they would find some other project to do, and crossing the Atlantic was it. So they sent the airship that they had used to try to go to the North Pole back to France and had it extended, made larger, put a different engine in it, and then sent it to Atlantic City to be put together. So this is where we're picking up the story. This is Atlantic City in 1910, a photo taken from a balloon that was tethered to the pier that you can see here, and it was tethered out here on the end. And they took this picture of Atlantic City, so we know what Atlantic City looks like in 1910. This is Walter Wellman. Walter Wellman was a newspaper man with evidently some money behind him, and he's the one that wanted to discover the North Pole. And what he would do, he would go out on these types of expeditions, then he would write lots of stories for the other newspapers, and he was becoming famous as an explorer and, of course, as a newspaper man. He was earning a lot of money and he had sponsors. So this was, he wanted to keep a good thing going, and this is why he got involved at Atlantic City. This is looking south, the south end of Atlantic City from that balloon. And some of these hotels, some of them are still, parts of them are still there today. Of course, this is Casino Row now. And this is looking north. And these are the piers. This is now the Ocean One, I believe. And it was known as the $1 Million Pier. And what's his name's pier before that? And this is the steel pier down here. And that's the central pier there. And there was a Heinz Pier way up at the end here. And this is Brigantine way up in this area. Well, back over in here, and I couldn't really find it in the picture, so I kind of blew it up a little bit, and I found where they had the hangar, and that's what the hangar looked like. Now, what they did is they made a deal with the Aero Club of Atlantic City to build this hangar, and they were politically connected. There were a lot of businessmen involved, and the mayor. And they put some money together and built this huge hangar where they could put the airship together inside. And they had boards thrown down on the beach sand. So to give you a little idea of what one of their problems was later on, in the past they had put together the airship up where it was rocky, way up up near the North Pole, way up in Spitsbergen, I think it was. And it was rocks and ice and snow. So they didn't have too many problems other than the cold when they put it together. Atlantic City is all beach sand. And this hangar was built on top of the beach sand, and there were boards thrown down, and the wind blew through, and you can see that it doesn't look like a really great building here, and there were probably lots of openings in between the boards and around here. And the beach sand used to blow around inside. They never considered that it could be a problem. Here's a picture inside while they were working on it. They have a lot of lines going down. You can see some of them over here, where they had sandbags on because it was inflated with hydrogen. And they built a hydrogen generator that they mixed acids and things, whatever it takes to make hydrogen, and they pumped it in there, and it was ready to go. It was all tethered down, and they had attempted to go in August, and they just couldn't get everything ready in time. There's a close-up picture of some of the stuff, and you can see that a lot of materials and things are laying around the bottom. They also had a French mechanic there who was working on the engines, and they had some kind of a running feud with him, and there was some suspicion afterwards that he might have done something to cause problems because he was fired off of the project, and they weren't 100% sure that he was on their side all the time. The genius of this airship is a guy by the name of Melvin Vanneman. Vanneman was an interesting guy. He became famous early on in life because he built a camera that would take 360-degree photographs, and he would climb to the top of masts of sailboats in harbors, put the camera on top of the mast, and wait for the ship to settle down, and then would take a picture, and it would be a large format negative, maybe a foot high and several feet long as it went around. And he designed the camera, and it was very good, and he made some money. He went to Australia and took pictures in Hawaii, and they still use those pictures today. If you search on him on the internet, you may find some of those photos. He was kind of a daredevil guy, and he got into ballooning for the same reason, and they found him Wellman found him over in France when he was having his airship made, and he hired him. It turns out this guy was a pretty good engineer, self-taught, and he designed some interesting things for the airship. Here's the engines for the airship. There's one engine there, and there's the shaft and the propeller would get mounted here, and here's the other engine. But the difference between them, you see there's quite a bit of difference in the construction. He designed this so that the propeller could be rotated so that it could face forward or aft, and it could also rotate and drive it up or down to overcome some of the lift of the hydrogen gas. And he's the first person to invent that. And so he was a pretty smart cookie. He's standing inside the framework, and of course the balloon the gas balloon is above it. And this is a tank where they had gasoline and water in for the trip. There's some pictures of the engine. By the way, this guy standing here is named Simon. He's a navigator. Simon was a navigator for the White Star Line, and he got permission from Imlay, the guy that was involved with the Titanic and was on the Titanic when it struck the iceberg. He was the company representative. He's the one that was driving the captain of the Titanic to go fast through the ice fields. But he had to sign permission for this guy to get time off to be the navigator on this trip. And that's a little thing that I found out just recently. Simon. This is the other motor looking you can see that there's one motor in the background back in here somewhere. There's the crew. There's Wellman. I think it was Loud was his brother-in-law. And there's Vanneman, and there's Simon. And this could be the brother-in-law. I forget. One of these two guys was Wellman's brother-in-law. And there's our hero, Jack Irwin. He's the guy that was the radio operator, and he'll be the guy that would push the key of a spark transmitter with a huge bag of hydrogen over top of his head. And he remarked that he was wondering what was going to happen when he did that because the frame of the airship was the antenna. So we had the antenna within inches of the gas bag. They wanted to make sure it wasn't leaking. The Marconi company provided a lifeboat transmitter, and this is a rough picture. It's the best I could pull it up of Jack Irwin, and he's in the hangar. You can see that they're the sandbags that was used to tie the airship down. There's some more over here. He's got it sitting on a crate, and he was testing it. And I did read somewhere where he was actually had an antenna rigged up inside somewhere, and he was sending to the local station in Atlantic City to make sure it was working. And there's various components there. And I got a better picture of it here. And I color enhanced this one a little. This is the mag receiver here. This is the transmitter here, the capacitor bank, and with room inside for the batteries. This is the key, and this is the coil, and this is the antenna coil, and the coupling was made by adjusting how far open the lid was hinged, so that the further open it was, the less RF that was going out, and if he pulled it all the way down, there'd be more RF going out. But this was not a very powerful transmitter, and they expected it to go 25 to 50 miles under the best conditions. But he figured that they were going to be going across in the shipping lanes, and they would always be within range of some of the ships. And of course, the ships were all going to be watching for this thing. Now we're going to introduce Kiddo. Kiddo was a stray cat. Kiddo enjoyed hanging around, getting handouts of food, and Vanneman really befriended the cat, and they became good friends. And there's a picture of them before the flight. And he figures heavily into the story. Back to the hangar, they had everything about ready to go. And this is the main door that they would open up. They pull this canvas back, and they could pull it out.
Hey, John?
Yes?
Show the picture before with all the hotels, right? And way back was open land. Sand went that far out? Because this hangar was far back, right?
Oh yeah, this is back in around where Gardner's Basin is today, if you're familiar with Atlantic City. It's not too far from the Hilton, the original Hilton Casino, and not far from what's that other big casino in Atlantic City? But it's closer to Brigantine on that end of Atlantic City. It's no longer there. Of course, the hangar disappeared years ago. Jack Irwin said on the morning of October 15th, which is 7 days from now, 100 years ago, he was awakened at 4 o'clock and told to go aboard. They decided that they were going to go that day. They had an alarm that they would send out. They had all of the firemen and policemen and the lifeguards. It was the end of the summer. Most of them were not working on the beach, and they showed up to help pull this ship out. And this is an artist's conception taken from a photograph. The photograph was so poor, the copy that I have, it didn't show up, so I went with the artist's conception. I cleaned it up a little bit. But it pretty much shows how it was being pulled out, and also had to be held down at the same time because of the sandbags. Now they got it in position near the hangar, and they're going to put the lifeboat on board and hook that up. And the reason for the lifeboat, they figured that they were going to, ships all had lifeboats, so they were going to be crossing the Atlantic, and they figured if they had the lifeboat, if they had to ditch the aircraft, they would be able to be in the boat and hopefully be rescued. Also, the radio was in the lifeboat, so that in the event that they did ditch, the radio was already there, and they could fly a kite for an antenna, and they could call CQD. So you can see that they got the lifeboat underneath. They're getting ready to pull it up. You see the lines in it right there. By the way, this is the stern end. This is the rudders. Here. There's a picture where they were actually hanging the lifeboat. I think that somebody had pasted in years ago a Wellman's picture up here. But these guys were actually the guys that were working to hang it. It's a poor picture that came out of an old book. And so everybody's getting ready to go, and they're hanging the lifeboat, and they're getting ready to tow it out to sea and cut it loose. Here's a plan of the lifeboat to give you an idea what was in it. It had an airtight compartment in the back and in the front. The wireless instruments were right here so that they could work it from the cockpit. They had a canvas hood over top of the cockpit, and they had 2 escape hatches that they could get away from in here. And the mast was stowed separately. It was lashed down to the deck and could be put in there, and they had a sail for it. And this is the shackle, and the shackle here where they hung it from the airship. Now you see this well here. That was actually a hole in the lifeboat. And this lifeboat, by the way, is made out of laminated mahogany. It was the first time they did that. So it was incredibly strong and didn't weigh a whole lot. And in this well, you'll see that they ran a cable through that while they were using it. There it is, just after they let go, and just after the cat was thrown on board. Some of these people here got a hold of the cat and tossed him into the lifeboat just as it went up. And
9 lives.
he went nuts. The cat did not want to be in there and was running around and squalling. And supposedly the first message he sent was, "Get this damn cat off this boat." And they were already being towed out to sea at this point, and they decided they finally caught the cat, and they put the cat in a basket, tied a line to the basket, and tried to lower the cat down to the tug, but the tug had already cut them loose, and the wind was blowing them faster than the tug could go, and they had a choice to either pull the cat back or drop him in the sea, and they loved the cat enough that they didn't do that. So they pulled him back up, and then he settled down, and he was fine. And he cuddled up with the radio operator most of the trip, and his nickname was Kiddo, and he was a male cat. Now this will give you an idea of the construction of the airship. You saw some of the pictures earlier of the framework and the gas bags up top, and the lifeboats here, and they have this thing called the equilibrator hanging through it. The equilibrator was a series of tanks that would drag in the ocean, and they had gasoline and water in there. And as they needed them, they would pull them up, and they could put gas, and replenish the gasoline up here for the motors, and they could leave it open so that when it went back down, it would fill with seawater. And it was used as a ballast. And I'll show you how it worked in a minute. Here's a plan of the gas bag and the air bags to help keep everything balanced. I don't know that much about it, but evidently the air bags are important to the shape and to keep the strength of the thing. And so they had all these different valves and things, and they had to keep all this thing balanced. And they could generate, they had a air pump that they could generate and fill these with air as needed if they had to let some gas go to balance out the size of it, I guess. Now here's the plan of the equilibrator and the lifting harness that they had. They had a pulley up here and a winch down here, and they could raise it and lower it as needed. And this steering wheel was hooked up to the engine so that it was the winch that would pull it up. Well, it was pretty heavy, so they had to use the assistance of the engine to lift it up out of the water. Power steering. Yeah, power winch. And this is a theory of how it worked. And the idea was they were dragging this tail down in the water. And if the balloon started to ascend, as they would rise up out of the water, the tail, the weight of it would come out and then add weight to it automatically, and it would come back down. The idea was they were going to try to keep a median. So if they were up real high, the weight of this would bring it back down, and if it got down too low, the weight, of course, would be now floating because gasoline floats, and it would allow it to keep this area here. It was good theory, but it didn't work real well. They had a lot of problems with condensation on the balloon, which added a lot of weight to it, and they had a hard time getting enough lift. Here's how the tanks were constructed. It was one right behind the other. They had a cable that ran through them, and then they could fill them or empty them as needed. There's an artist's conception of the airship flying over Atlantic City. You notice the lifeboat's not on there. That's how we know it's an artist's conception. Now, in Atlantic City, they had a station out at the end of Jeffers, the Captain Jeffries Pier, which was the $1 Million Pier. This is when it was a DeForest wireless station, and people could go out and they could watch the wireless operators work out here, and they could send messages if they wanted. But the idea of building it at the time was when the ships were coming into Philadelphia, this was far enough out to sea that they could intercept and get the message, then telegraph the message to Philadelphia to get the pier assignments for the ships as they were coming in, and also handle some messages. DeForest later sold it to United Fruit Company, and I think they owned it at the time that this airship was running. If you notice, we got a guy peeking through the window here, and he's the operator inside. Now, at sea, when they were sending, they had to stop the engines, and because the engines were pretty noisy. They had spark plugs and would generate a lot of noise. So if the signals were weak, they had to stop the engines so they could hear the land stations. The color postcard of the $1 Million Pier. And there's the operator from the $1 Million Pier, Bobby Miller. The station call letters were AX, and the call sign assigned to the airship was W. And somebody just contacted me a couple days ago, and their theory is that the W was used because it was Wellman, not the W that we consider to be the call sign for the United States calls, because they didn't have them back then. So I think that's probably a pretty good theory that W was for Wellman. There's a picture of the inside of the station around the same time.
Where's this picture from? Where'd you get this?
Actually, I have the photograph. I got it. It was from Tom Appleby, which I'll show you in a second. Tom Appleby was one of the operators there around this time, but not during this time, and he had his own photographs, and I have his photographs. This is Bobby Miller, and this was another operator. And Tom Appleby thought his name was Heselton. He was from New York City, but he wasn't sure. I don't know who that guy is. And this is a detector that Tom Appleby built and had out at that station and was told to take it out. The only company equipment was allowed to be used there. But he said this was so much more sensitive than the junk that they had. I read this in one of his letters. Now, meanwhile, Wellman is sending out story after story to the newspapers, and here's a New York Times paper. I doctored up and put a better photograph in, but it was the same photograph, but I had a clearer one, so I put that in there. I also did that here. But it was kind of a running tale. Every couple of days there was another story about the airship. Well, now they're talking here about the wireless equipment, and that, I don't know, I can't remember, oh, this is September 11th. So this was before they left. So this is some kind of a doctored picture that they had, evidently. The Scientific American had this beautiful illustration. It was in black and white. I colored it. showing what they thought the airship would look like at sea, and it's pretty accurate. You see the equilibrator as it drug along. They also used that up in the Arctic, and it did not work at all on the ice up there because the ice isn't smooth like you would think ice would be. It's all jagged and pushed together, and it was getting caught in the ice when they tried that back in 1908. But anyway, that's the artist's conception of it running along in the ocean. They had the American flag flying in the back, and the engines turning along, and a lifeboat underneath, and a simulated ship.
Were those engines supposed to run all the time, the whole length of the trip?
Well, they had it designed so that they could run with either engine or both engines. They had planned originally to run both engines and the motor all the way across. Yeah. Unfortunately, as they were going along here in this area, one engine quit on them. And when they got up here, the shaft of the other engine was wobbling so bad, they were afraid that the propeller would come loose and go into the gas bag and end the trip. So they shut both engines down at this point. And that is as far east as they got. And they were involved in a storm, a northeaster, I guess, and it ended up blowing them down this way to the point where they were finally rescued. But the problem that they ran into is that blowing sand got into those open bearings that you saw at the ends of the shaft. They never test flew it. They didn't have any idea. They had packed it with grease in the beginning, and then the sand added to it, and then the sand ended up like miniature files, and the shaft was egg-shaped, and the propellers were wobbling, and then, of course, the more they wobbled, the more egg-shaped it became until they had to shut it off. So at this point, they figured, well, the prevailing wind's coming from the west. It'll probably still blow us over to Europe. Let's see how we do. Well, then they got in that storm, and you can see that they started drifting south.
It seemed like from the photo before, they're only, what, 200 feet up? 100
Yeah.
feet? That's all. That's all they wanted to just be.
Oh yeah, and right up around Long Island here. Now you got to picture this. As they're going along with this equilibrator behind them, the engines were still running at that point, so they couldn't hear a lot of what was going on. All of a sudden, they happened upon a schooner, a three-mast schooner. Can you imagine the guy sailing the schooner, seeing this monster with the engines running and lights on board, because they had lights on there with the generator, coming across the stern of their ship and almost hit them. Probably a few of them gave up drinking, or maybe they started, I don't know. But the captain actually made log entries that it happened, and this was reported. Meanwhile, they're still talking to Nantucket in this area. And according to the operators in Nantucket, the signals were so strong, they actually went outside to see if they could see it, but they weren't that close. But evidently, the altitude that they had at the time was sufficient to make the connection there. So while they're coming down here, they're not seeing anybody. They drifted 2 days, and they finally spotted a ship. And they got the attention of the ship by using a torch, that they called them, an electric torch, which we would call a flashlight today. And once they caught the ship's attention, then they told them they had, by Morse code, that they had a radio on board. So they woke the radio operator up. It was nighttime, around 3 or 4 in the morning. And the radio operator turned on his radio, and at the rest of the time, they talked by radio to coordinate the rescue. Now, luckily, there was a photographer on board the Trent. The Trent was a mail ship that was en route from Bermuda to New York City. And the guy had been on vacation or something, but still had like 7 or 8 or 9 glass negatives left that he could take some pictures, so he did. And there's one where it was off the bow. And they radioed to him, and they're saying, well, see if you can run up underneath of us, and we'll drop the boat down on your deck. Well, that didn't work too well. And and the wind was blowing them pretty fast, so that the Trent actually had to run wide open to try to keep up to them. And so they basically said, okay, keep up with us the best you can, and what we'll do is we'll ditch the lifeboat and you can pick us up. They tried to toss a line, and the Trent was moving and the wind was blowing in a different direction, and Wellman had his hand injured from the line slipping through his hands. If you notice, there's only one propeller now. They had ditched one engine trying to lighten the load because they were losing altitude all the time. So they were throwing everything overboard they didn't need. They still had the equilibrator at this time. And
What about the cat?
yeah, they still had the cat. So they're getting ready to be rescued at this point. There's a little closer up picture. But there's the hole where the other engine was, and they had tossed the whole thing overboard. And there they are in the water, and you see that there's 6 people on board.
With the cat.
With the cat. When they landed, of course, the wind was blowing the whole thing sideways. So when they cut loose, they hit the water sideways and almost rolled over, but it righted itself. It was supposed to be a self-righting lifeboat, and it worked. But then they had a secondary problem. The Trent was going as fast as it could and almost ran them over. They bounced along the side, and then they were worried about it getting into the propellers as they got near the stern of the Trent. But luckily, they pushed it off just far enough that didn't happen. It took a couple of turnarounds of the Trent to finally be able to pull up to them. And of course, at that speed, that size ship takes a couple miles to stop and turn around. So it was quite a while before they were actually rescued.
Was the Trent, John? Do you know?
No, I don't know. But I have a good picture of it, so you'll get a better idea in a minute. There's the radio operator on the Trent, Louis Ginsburg. He was a New Jersey resident, lived up around Hackensack somewhere, and when he retired, he was also a ham. And I had his call at one time, but I've misplaced it. But his son was, and I forget the first name, but was that poet named Ginsberg. He got Allen Ginsberg. That was his son. Yep.
Oh, he was a beach poet.
Yeah. He was always in trouble. Yeah. What they call it, not politically correct.
Oh, no, he wasn't politically correct at all.
But this guy was evidently a pretty active ham, and hammed the rest of his life. But there's the station on board. I mean, you can see the equipment.
Would have been an interesting guy to talk to, John.
There's the Trent. So you see it's a pretty good sized ship. You can see the number of people standing on board. You can see they have their own lifeboats. They rescued the lifeboat and pulled it on board. And Irwin mentioned in his log that he rescued the radio equipment, that it was still okay. And the last I heard of the radio equipment, it was sent back to England to the Marconi Company.
What frequency were they using?
Spark gap frequencies, low frequencies, down at the bottom of the broadcast band, the bottom of our AM band today. Now they sent a tug out to bring the people back to land, and there's Wellman, and that's his wife and his daughters. And back here is our hero, Jack Irwin. You can see he's got a big smile on his face. I got a little better picture. You can see, yep, there he is there. And he survived okay. You can see Wellman's hand injured, still holding a cigar. And so they were happy to be back to New York. Here's Irwin's log. Now, he did not keep the log while all of the rescue was going on, but reconstructed it once he was aboard the Trent. And he used the Trent's log to write his log. And there is the word for word of what they communicated back and forth. and then some explanation of what happened, and his signature at the end of the log. Now, Irwin was working in a radio lab that was associated with Radio Broadcast Magazine. They would build and publish radios and diagrams all the time. So he had, later on, he went to work for the Radio Broadcast Magazine. This was in 1924, this photo. But before that, he joined the Army, and he was in World War I. He was a captain, and he was in the Signal Corps. Colonel Jack Irwin enlisted in the National Guard in 1916, and he died in action during World War II. He was a colonel.
Where was he when he was killed in action?
I believe he was in France. General order from Fort Monmouth, they named a street after him. He had worked out of Fort Monmouth, and he was a colonel at the time.
There we go. Here's a real hero.
Now, Kiddo's name became Trent because of the ship. It was the toast of the town. They put him in Gimbel's window. He's sleeping on satin pillows, eating the very best fish that they could afford. And his likeness was put on a postcard. And Melvin Vanneman signed it because he used these postcards as a fundraiser. He was going to try again the next year to cross the Atlantic. Now watch the cat.
He was a handsome cat.
Yeah, he was a happy cat.
No, there you go. Mine don't look alike, Ray. All five of them.
And you can see he was pretty happy.
He's breaking at you, John.
Now, Trent went home with Melvin Vanneman. Melvin's daughter adopted the cat, and the cat lived with his daughter, I guess, until he passed away eventually. There's a picture of Vanneman taking him home.
Yeah, picture.
Now, Vanneman the next year made a deal with the Goodyear Rubber Company to build another balloon. It was called the Akron. It was the first Akron. There's an Akron later on that was a Navy ship. This Akron, they sent to Atlantic City to the same hangar. They constructed it. It was basically the same thing except it was bigger, and they figured they had a better chance. When they launched it, they had a big problem with personnel. Wellman decided at the last minute he was not going to go on it this time, and he stayed back. Vanneman went ahead, and they said that Vanneman was pushing the envelope. They weren't really ready, but he said, no, we got to go, and he was going earlier in the year. They launched it. It went up to about 1,100 feet, 1,200 feet, and blew up. And all the lives were lost on it. And my guess is that it was probably something to do with the transmitter. They had another, a more powerful transmitter on this. And I just have a feeling that it was hydrogen related. Though all of the people in the Goodyear, the scientists and everything, said it wasn't their balloon that was a problem. You know, and everybody said it wasn't their problem, but there was a problem. It blew up and they all died. So I always wondered what happened to the lifeboat. And I'm figuring, well, it fell down from 1,000 feet. It was probably destroyed. I saw some photographs of them fishing what was left of the airship out of the ocean. It went down right over Brigantine. And in June, I'm looking on the internet for some last-minute information, and I find that the airship was discovered in a warehouse at Goodyear, and they decided to donate it to the Air and Space Museum. And here it is being delivered on a truck. They built a frame for it. And what they had done is, after they fished the balloon out of the water in the ocean after it blew up, they sent everything back to Akron, Ohio, so they could find out what went wrong, because they decided at that point in time this was a business they wanted to get into. And as you know, they built a lot of ships for the Navy over the years. So they must have got the lifeboat back too, and they just pushed it out of the way, and it was in storage. So 98 years later, it was donated to the Air and Space Museum. And these are these are the best pictures I could get of them unloading it from the truck.
That doesn't look like Borghese. That looks like one of the hangars in Ohio or Lakehurst.
Well, this airship, I think, is the one that Goodyear donated to the Air and Space Museum. And I think that's where they are down there. Well, I'm not sure. This could be out there.
That's a sub-spotter. Airship.
But I know the lifeboat is down there in Chantilly, Virginia, because I've talked to the curator.
Prepping it to go.
Pardon?
Might have been when they were prepping it to go, because that's inside of one of the goods hangars.
Well, they have big hangars down there too in Washington.
Yeah, I've been down there. It's beautiful.
So there's another picture of it. You can see there's the cockpit area. There's the hole for the mast. And there's the inside of it. You can see that they strengthened it with some beams, probably to keep it together after the crash. There's the hatch where they crawled into the bow. There's the other hatch where they crawled into the stern area. So my plan was to go down and get some pictures by now, but I just haven't had the time to go down there. I've been talking with the curator down there, and as soon as I can make it down there, he's going to have me go over so I can take some pictures of it. I want my picture standing next to it. I really do. That's it. Anybody have any final questions? Yes.
What happened to America?
Oh yeah, thanks for asking that question. When they cut the lifeboat loose, they had said that they opened the gas bags, the valves, so that it would deflate and go into the ocean and sink. But when they cut that weight off of it, of the lifeboat, it shot up 2,000 or 3,000 feet, and the last they saw it was drifting south. In a book that was written around 1914 or 15 of I don't know, something to do with flight and South America. The guy, and I have it documented at home. The guy interviewed some Peruvian Indians, which to them this was some kind of a monster that they saw going across the area of the mountains where they lived in Peru, with the American flag on the back. And so it's possible. They never found it, but it's possible it could be down there in the jungle somewhere. It would be interesting if it is to find whatever happens to be left of it.
It
But-
wound up at Mount Ararat, John.
Couldn't it stayed in the air until about 1947 and landed somewhere in New Mexico?
That's, you never know. It was silver. Any other questions?
How big was the lifeboat? It doesn't look very big.
I think it was 26 feet. And another interesting thing I just found out about the lifeboat, the company in England that built the lifeboat went into business shortly thereafter making aircraft, that amphibious aircraft that can land in the water. And they were in business all the way through World War II. So they went from being a boat company to building aircraft after that. And the Smithsonian will have a whole story on that.
What was the name of the company?
I don't remember, but it's in the documentation I have. Okay, thanks.
John, what's your this month's edition of
Thank you.
QST? What's your article on this month?
Well, it's the last episode of this story.
Okay.
So you guys are up to date on that now.
Okay, great. Okay, so again, we're going to have our auction, so please step outside. And John, thanks again for
Okay.
joining us with your story.